Here's some more straight matter. This is actually an answer in a two voice, and it's medical. On the record, it's not counted. I was scheduled to be on duty that night. It was my afternoon off, but they had given me the call that night, and I came in. And the reason I remember 16:30 or 4:30 in answer to you earlier is I came in 30 minutes early to take over at 5 o'clock, which would normally be the time I would assume the night responsibilities. And I came in because I knew that Dr. Gill, who was covering at that point, had been up most of the night before and probably kind of tired from working all day. And so I thought I would relieve him. So I arrived at approximately 16:30 in the delivery room, give or take a minute, and got a report from Dr. Gill, as I indicated before, of the diagnosis that was being worked with at that present time. I watched them perform one vacuum extraction which failed. The vacuum extractor is so designed that you use a certain amount of vacuum, usually somewhere around 50, 60, 65 millimeters of mercury. You pump it up. And the nice part about it in a teaching program is that it will come off before you can't have residents put a lot of pressure on a vacuum extractor because it just won't hold on to the scalp. It will come off. So I watched one of these applications and the extractor came off, and in the process of doing this, why Dr. Gill asked if he might leave if I would assume the responsibilities for watching the delivery. And in view of the fact that he had reported no complications or problems, I said, sure. I watched the application 2 more times, at which point I called a halt to the proceedings. I don't usually like to let the vacuum extractor function more than 2 or 3 times. Those are round numbers, but you just don't put them on indefinitely and keep pulling on it 100 times or 50 times or something like that. At this point, I asked them to stop putting it on, and I said, let's reevaluate the situation. So we did. And the 3 of us physicians examined the patient at this time. I thought from my examination anyway that the patient was transverse and that my diagnosis then became transverse presentation. And what that means is that, well, the baby is normally delivered with the back of its head facing the ceiling, okay? The mother is lying on her back, and as the baby comes out, the back of its head will be pointing to the ceiling. A baby is called anterior if this happens. If a baby comes out with its face pointing towards the ceiling, in other words, sort of upside down like, then it's called posterior, okay? And the reason for that designation is that everything takes place on the posterior fontanelle here, this thing. It's through its location. If the baby is halfway in between so that the baby's head is coming out sideways, this way, either way, so the side of the head comes out and it's called transverse, okay? 90% or a large percentage of the babies who are delivered, particularly first babies, deliver anterior, but almost all of them will engage in a transverse position. They come down in a transverse position and then rotate so that the back of the head comes out and they rotate into an anterior. It was my opinion that this lady had not rotated. She had not rotated that head into the anterior position. So I instructed the residents to manually rotate the head. I thought she was an LOT, which means that the left occiput or the occiput was on the patient's left side. So you rotate it this way so that the head comes up. The resident did. We put the vacuum on 1 more time. The vacuum came off. I called time, invited the chief resident into the hall and told him I thought we should do a cesarean section. I said I thought we could take her over to the operating room and use trial forceps if we wanted to, but I thought that we would probably eventually end up with a cesarean. I then, at that point, went back to the nurse's station. The chief resident, Dr. Anguiano, went back into the room. Now, I don't know what happened at this point because I was not a witness to it. All I know is I went back to the nurse's station to write my note that we were going to do a section and wait for Dr. Aquilano to come out and start making the necessary phone calls to get anesthesia, et cetera, to set up for the section. And the next thing I know, Dr. Bowerman, the pediatrician doctor, is running out into the hall asking me to come into the operating room, into the delivery room, stat, immediately. I went into the room, stat, immediately, and this was approximately at 16:50. And you'll have to give me a minute or two there because I went in, and what was immediately obvious was what we call a turtle sign. The baby's head comes out, and because the shoulders don't descend immediately, the head sort of sucks back in, sort of comes back in, and it looks like one of the Notre Dame football linemen with its shoulder pads on, just bunched up here like this.
Doesn't count.
No, it's not counted. So this is some 2 voice now. More of this medical. 160. Yeah.
Okay, begins with the question for the record. Good morning. My name is Walter Rutten, and I'm one of the attorneys for plaintiff Rachel.
Rutten?
Yes, Wuroten. And I'm one of the attorneys in the office of Dan Sullivan, who unfortunately couldn't make it today, and I'm subbing in for him. So hopefully this won't take very long. Could you state your name for the record, please?
James K. Ahern, MD.
And your present business address?
321 Columbia Drive, Lodi, California.
And zip code?
95240.
Have you ever had your deposition taken before?
Yes.
Approximately how many times?
A dozen.
More than 10?
Yeah, probably.
So I'm assuming that you're familiar with the rules of a deposition, and I can kind of dispense with those.
I hope so.
Okay, I'd like to quickly go over your academic background starting from high school.
You want places and dates or what?
In general, yes.
I graduated from Mamaroneck High School in 1964. Mamaroneck. Mamaroneck, New York.
And from there, where did you get your BA?
Wesleyan University, Middletown, Connecticut, 1968.
That was in what?
Pre-med.
From where? From there?
New York University Medical School.
And do you know approximately what year?
1973.
And
internship, San Joaquin General Hospital. 73, 74.
Okay.
Residency, St. Vincent's Hospital, Indianapolis, Indiana, 74, 75. U.S. Navy, Chelsea Naval Hospital, Chelsea, Massachusetts, 1975, 77.
Okay, and you were on the staff at San Joaquin General Hospital, were you?
The answer is yes. You didn't give me dates, so.
Well, I was going to get the dates from you. Let me say, a poorly worded question deserves a bad answer. So could you give me the dates that you were on the staff at San Joaquin General Hospital?
Yes, I started in August or September 1st, I believe it was 2009, and then retired May 1st, actually April 29th of 2011.
And after 11, you're no longer practicing?
Correct.
Okay, and what was your position during this tenure from September 09? What would be your classification?
I think the classification was medical staff.
Could you just kind of describe the difference between house staff and attending staff?
The attending staff is comprised of physicians who are fully trained, usually board certified and at least board eligible, and who are hired or employed to act as supervisorial type physicians. The house staff are physicians who are acquiring specific time and a learning process there. They're acquiring, how do I want to say this? The necessary time to be eligible for board examination.
And on 11/8/09, you were classified as attending staff?
Yeah, that's why I hesitated when you asked your question, because on my little card here, it says medical staff, but most of the time people refer to it as attending staff. So I think you're kind of using synonymous words here.
Did you review any records today for this deposition?
I reviewed yes.
Okay, when was the first time that you came in contact with Rachel Post, if you can remember?
Yeah, 4:30 in the afternoon of the day she was in labor, whatever date that was.
Okay, and did you have a diagnosis at that time?
Yeah, I was given a diagnosis by Dr. Gill.
Okay, do you remember what that diagnosis was?
Yeah, she was pregnant, near term, in active labor, second stage with no complications.
Now, I have I think it's called Report of Operation dated 11/8/09. And this is a 2-page document with, it looks like 2 signatures at the end. Are you familiar with this document?
Yes, well, I know about this document.
Okay,
I'm not sure I would call myself familiar.
okay. Is that your signature at the end?
It certainly probably is. It doesn't look like much, does it?
Other than your signature, what is your relationship to this document? And I'm referring to, did you have this drawn up, or did you just, somebody else dictated it and you just signed it, or?
The policy at San Joaquin General Hospital is for the resident physician, who in this case would be Dr. Aguiano, to draw up this type of document, and the attending staff or medical staff to peruse it and co-sign it.
Okay, and now do you remember signing this document, or are you?
No, we signed hundreds of them.
I want to enter this as Exhibit 1. Okay. I think you stated that you first observed Rachel Post at 4:30 on the day she was giving birth to the child here that's in question that subsequently died. Did you arrive at any opinion as to the cause of the death of the infant?
Well, I understand the rules.
You can answer if you have an opinion and if you will. But the objection would be that if you would prefer to depose Dr. Ahern as an expert, we would be noticed as such.
Would you reread the question, please? At what time are you referring?
Well, let's put it this way, at any time.
Well, I think 2 weeks later, we got a post-mortem exam report, yes.
Okay, is that the first time you formed an opinion on the death of the infant?
I think by the strict rules of the word opinion, yes.
Okay, what was that opinion?
That it was pre-existing brain damage.
And that was the cause of death?
I think that's quite completely outlined in the PATH report.
Okay, did your opinion ever change after that point as to the cause of death?
After the report?
Yeah, after the initial report, did your opinion change as to the cause of death?
No.
Do you know who was present in the operating room, or rather at the, I think if I remember correctly, the activity took place in her room and not in an operating room. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, do you know who was present at the time you arrived?
Yeah, I think I do. The doctor standing at the perineum, actively involved in the delivery, was Jeffrey Gable. The doctor standing immediately behind Dr. Gable was Dr. Aguiano, Francisco Aguiano. And the other doctor in the room was the staff, or attending, whatever word we're going to use, physician, Jasper Gill. There was a pediatric team there, which was headed by Dr. Bowerman, and I don't remember exactly how many people were on that team, but I vaguely remember at least 2, probably 3.
Okay.
There was an obstetric team present consisting of at least 2, let's call them nurses. I'm not sure whether they were LVNs, RNs, obstetric technicians, or whatever their exact licenses were, but nursing staff from obstetrics. And then there was a lady present who was obviously, or I think obviously, the coach for the patient. I don't know what her relationship was to the patient. To this day, I don't know who was who.
Okay.
As far as I remember, this is who was present.
Okay, and how did you arrive to come at the room? Were you called?
I was scheduled to be on duty that night. It was my afternoon off, but they had given me the call that night, and I came in. And the reason I remember 16:30 or 4:30 in answer to you earlier is I came in 30 minutes early to take over at 5 o'clock, which would normally be the time I would assume the night responsibilities. And I came in because I knew that Dr. Gill, who was covering at that point, had been up most of the night before and probably kind of tired from working all day. And so I thought I would relieve him. So I arrived at approximately 16:30 in the delivery room, give or take a minute, and got a report from Dr. Gill, as I indicated before, of the diagnosis that was being worked with at that present time. I watched them perform one vacuum extraction, which failed. The vacuum extractor is so designed that you use a certain amount of vacuum, usually somewhere around 50, 60, 65 millimeters of mercury. You pump it up. And the nice part about it in a teaching program is that it will come off before you can't have residents put a lot of pressure on a vacuum extractor because it just won't hold on to the scalp. It will come off. So I watched one of these applications and the extractor came off. And in the process of doing this, Dr. Gill asked if he might leave, if I would assume the responsibilities for watching the delivery. And in view of the fact that he had reported no complications or problems, I said, sure. I watched the application 2 more times, at which point I called a halt to the proceedings. I don't usually like to let the vacuum extractor function more than 2 or 3 times. Those are round numbers, but you just don't put them on indefinitely and keep pulling on it 100 times or 50 times or something like that. At this point, I asked them to stop putting it on, and I said, let's reevaluate the situation. So we did. And the 3 of us physicians examined the patient at that time. I thought from my examination anyway that the patient was transverse and that my diagnosis then became transverse presentation.
Could you explain what that means?
Well, the baby normally is delivered with the back of its head facing the ceiling, okay? The mother is lying on her back and the baby comes out. The back of its head will be pointing to the ceiling. A baby is called anterior if this happens. If a baby comes out with its face pointing towards the ceiling, in other words, sort of upside down like, then it's called a posterior, okay? And the reason for that designation is that everything takes place on the posterior fontanelle here, this thing. It's through its location. Okay.
That's funny because that's who I work for, Dr. Gill.
You still do? Jasper Gill?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay, this is now counted and this will be 160. Start up here. Different material.
What's the answer?
Nope.
Okay.
All right, sorry.
Okay, here we go for the record. Okay.
Not when it comes to the damages. They may skip a process in the closing of the file where, but the damages, they still have to, DOI needs to have everything documented. So they document it. They may not review it as scrupulously as they would if they weren't as busy.
Okay, now there are occasions when an individual can commit fraud with a perfectly accurate estimate. Isn't that true?
I guess. I don't know that.
Okay.
If you give me an example, I'd say yes or no, but.
Okay. Let me give you an example. You tell me whether or not fraud can be committed with a perfectly honest, accurate estimate, okay? Here's my hypothetical to you. Okay, Mr. Jones, let's say Mr. Ragsdale, okay, has a car, and it's a nice, clean car. It's not dented or crashed or whatever else, and he's driving along, and he has a collision, and it's dented, right?
Uh-huh.
And he's insured, you said, by Allstate.
Uh-huh.
Okay, he's insured by Allstate, and so he takes his car, and he gets an estimate, and it says it's going to cost $500 to fix that car. Well, let's say it's $3,000. Let's say it's $3,000 to fix that car, okay? You have the option to cash out, don't you?
Uh-huh.
And you decide, I'm going to cash out. I want my $3,000 and I'm going to sell that sucker because I don't like driving a damaged vehicle. There's some people who don't like to drive a car after it's been in a wreck, correct?
Correct.
And you'd rather have the $3,000 in your pocket. So I take the cash out, right?
Right.
The car is still like this, right?
Right.
But you don't want to drive a wrecked car, do you? No. So you sell it, right?
Okay.
You are not going to get top dollar, are you, for a wrecked car?
I would assume not.
Okay. So you sell it, and Mr. Jones says, hey, since it's damaged, I'm going to get a really good deal on that car because I'm going to buy it for half its value if I look in the blue book for a car. A blue Pepsi car, it says it's worth whatever the blue book, right?
Uh-huh.
And the Kelly blue book doesn't say crushed side panel, right?
Correct.
Okay. And so let's just say Kelly blue book says it's $10,000, but you are willing to take 5 because you already got 3. So you sell it for $5 to Mr. Jones, okay, right?
Okay,
Mr. Jones happens to be insured by USAA. He buys the car like this and he gets, most insurance companies don't require an inspection at the time that the initial policy is written, do they?
no, you know what, they ask for it, and to be truthful, the agents hardly ever do.
Hardly ever.
It's a problem.
So Mr. Jones says, hey, I bought a 2004 brand new Pepsi Scoot Mobile. Okay, he doesn't tell USAA that, hey, it's damaged. They don't come out and inspect it. And now he waits 2, 3, 4 months. And all of a sudden, he decides, you know what? I really don't like driving that dented. I got a really good deal, but I'd like to drive a new looking Pepsi Mobile. That one that even actually has a little bit of extra gold trim. So I wanted a little extra added to the paint, okay, right? So now he takes in the dented car and he goes over and let's say he sees somebody named David Castillo, okay? And he says, hey, I want an estimate for that car. And Mr. Castillo says, well, okay. And he writes an estimate saying it's going to cost $3,000 to make your car look like this, right?
Uh-huh.
Now he got a really good deal. He bought it for $5,000. He's going to get a free fix-up to get a $10,000 car. And he doesn't have to do anything except submit that claim, right?
Right, I guess I understand what you're saying now.
Okay, now the difference is that in your work as an SIU, if Mr. Castillo sees this car and writes it up for what it is and doesn't know that the person intends to defraud his company, there is no problem, is there?
Well, the insured obviously would be committing fraud,
All right,
but the shop wouldn't because they wouldn't know.
right, but now let me ask you the question. Now the individual is sitting there bragging, saying, hey man, I'm going to get me a new gold trim Pepsi Scoot Mobile, and let me tell you what I did. I scammed my insurance company. It was already dented and they don't know it, but I'm going to submit my honest, legitimate estimate to them to get them to paint this car. Not like this, but that it looks like that. Now, would that be fraud?
Was there damage on the vehicle?
Yeah.
And then he said that he put the damage, if there was damage on the vehicle, he told the shop that he put the damage on the vehicle and he still wrote it, then yes. So if he caused a damage to it, he told the guy that he caused damage, he said he was doing it, fraudulent activity, then I would say yes. Okay, we're gonna do just a couple minutes for read back now, okay?
That's actually Scoot.
Yeah.
Scoot.
I don't know, I mean, it's just a hypothetical thing.
I know.
It's not he doesn't want to, I think the attorney did not want to commit to a certain type of car.
Oh, I see.
You see, it's a
I
hypothetical.
got it. Oh, yeah, he did say that.
Yeah.
Pepsi Scoot.
Okay, so this I'll be just a little bit of read back, and let's do this in 22s. Starting with the question.
Okay, here we go. For the record, Mr. Ragsdale, I wanted to ask, are you familiar, do you know an organization referred to as the National Insurance Crime Bureau, generally referred to as NICB?
Yes.
And does NICB is part of working with law enforcement and insurance company? Do they keep track of statistics or how insurance companies function out there? I mean,
To be truthful, I really didn't deal with them. I didn't get that involved with SIU. I know NICB would flag stuff for insurance companies, like a certain person's name. Like, you know, a certain person has a lot of losses, stuff, and then that's about all I know.
okay.
I'm not real familiar with them. I know they exist. I know that they coordinate all the stuff. I'm really not familiar with them.
let me pose this question to you and just see if you're understanding. Is that from time to time, like insurance companies, like other entities, sort of have like their Pinkertons, like their private investigators and police, because sometimes law enforcement says we are swamped or we are not interested or whatever else, and they still wish to pursue an investigation or procedure that's sort of quasi-investigative, correct?
To be truthful, I don't know.
Okay, during the break, I put the cans up there. Okay, now I didn't understand that, but, and I'm not going to ask you to explain the hypo, except which of these two cans does the guy bring into the body shop?
The way he described it, he brought in this can.
Okay, do we need this can for the hypo that he?
That would be the finished product, is what he said that was.
Okay, but we don't need this can and we'll put it away. Now, the hypo that he described, first of all, does it have anything to do with the facts of this case or the hypo that you were presented with?
No. Okay, we're gonna read that back.
That was not good for me.
Okay, couple more minutes before we start takes. Same material. Right here. Okay.
For the record, all right, so it appears to you to be completely irrelevant to what we were talking about? All right, and Mr. Fraudster gets out and he meets Mr. Honest, auto body shop guy, and he says, I want an honest estimate, an honest, accurate, and complete estimate, right?
Uh-huh.
And Mr. Honest Auto Body Shop says, okay, I'll give you an honest, accurate, and complete estimate, right? Is that in the hypo?
Uh-huh.
And while Mr. Fraudster is standing there, he just announces gratuitously, by the way, I got this big plan where I'm going to defraud somebody as soon as I get your estimate. So hurry up, I can't wait to get out of here and defraud someone, right?
Uh-huh.
Now, in that scenario, is Mr. Auto Body Shop doing anything different than he would do if Mr. Fraudster just came in, kept his mouth shut, and asked for the estimate?
No, he would just write the damages.
All right. In the hypo, is there any human being on the planet who would ever do that, just gratuitously announce, I've got this big criminal plan to Mr. Honest Body Shop guy, wait for the estimate and leave?
To tell him that he was going to defraud him?
Yeah.
You wouldn't think so.
Would any sensible, rational human being do that?
I wouldn't think so, not if he's going to defraud it. I mean, I wouldn't. It wouldn't make any sense.
All right, no. And does anything like that ever happen to your knowledge in the real world?
No, because if they did it, they wouldn't say anything.
That's the whole point of the fraud,
Right,
to not say anything?
right,
That's how you carry out a fraudulent enterprise, right?
right.
So first of all, what Mr. Weidert described never happens, right? That's not a common practice in the industry.
I've never seen a guy come in and say, hey, I want to do this.
And it would never happen because the guy would have to be irrational and an idiot.
Be a little off.
Mr. Ragsdale, the hypo was it possible to commit fraud with a completely honest and accurate estimate? Wasn't that the hypo?
Correct.
Okay, wasn't what you drove in, your answer was that in fact, yes, you can commit fraud with a completely honest, accurate estimate. Wasn't that your answer?
At the end of your thing, yes.
Okay, now another hypothetical.
Oh, geez. We're good stuff with our hypotheticals.